Hello, everybody. Welcome to the People First Projects podcast, brought to you by the LVL Up Consulting project management team. Of course, as always, I'm joined by the wonderful Purnima and Machik from my team, who are really the brains trust behind this podcast. And we've talked about some awesome topics so far. And I think this is our fourth episode, guys. It's all merging together. Yes, I'm still regretting the tongue twister that it is the name that I selected for this podcast, but we're having a lot of fun and we're sharing our thoughts about how to deliver project management using a really human-centric approach. And this week's topic actually has the word human in it, which I quite like, which is communicating like a human with humans and for humans, because we are all humans, surprise, surprise. And we're going to share our tips on how we can do that. But it's probably a good segue potentially to show that we're not where we usually are. We're usually all sitting next to each other at LVL Up HQ doing this podcast, but we are communicating in a different way, which is probably our first tip of being adaptable to how you communicate with people based on where they are. So we are all in different locations today, but we thought we'll still record and share our thoughts. So communication, it's got to be one of the most important things when it comes to doing project management really, really well. And doing it like a human for humans has got a little special touch to it. And it's something that we're always anchoring ourselves in our team. But I'm so keen to hear from you two about your thoughts. And we're going to do this a little bit different today because we are recording virtually. So we're going to tag team. We're going to go probably Machik first. You give us your first tip, and then we'll go Purnima and we'll go back and forth from there. But I know this is a topic that you're both super passionate about. So this could be our longest podcast ever, but hopefully it's very informative. So let's start with you, Machik. Communication tips. Like a human, what's your top tip?
So I know that I'm saying this every week, but I'm interested in this topic so much that I can talk about it for hours. And of course, it's always a pleasure to discuss it with you. And yeah, I will start with something super simple, but something that most project managers forgot about. So I will start with clear and open communication. So we have to be sure that we communicate project goals, all of the tasks, timeline, everything that's connected with project to be on track with the rest of the team, because we have to be sure that everyone understands that. And we have to be sure that we encourage the whole team to be as open as possible and to not only speak in open way, but also to actively listen.
I love that. That's a good one. Your communication falls over essentially if people don't feel like they can be upfront and transparent. And sometimes there's bad news to deliver when you're in a project, and the ability to do that early and effectively and sort of problem solve, particularly with your PM, it's a gift actually to have that visibility and to be able to do that. So open communication, I like it. Purnima, I'm absolutely certain you've got a list of tips as well. What's at the top of your list?
What Machik mentioned was an excellent point. And just to add to that, we just have to be really good around nonverbal communication as well, because every individual have their own tone. So we just have to make sure to pay attention to the body language and facial expressions as well, because a lot of people have got that strong facial expressions. Sometimes a tone might be very loud, but what they try to communicate would be completely different. So understand the nonverbal cues as well. And if you're speaking, just try to maintain an open posture and appropriate hand gestures as well, so that you're very communicative, you're involved in that particular conversation as well.
I like that. And you've just sparked an idea for me, not just about the nonverbals, but different people have different learning styles. So I'm an auditory learner. That's my preferred way of learning things. So give me all the information, give me all the instructions verbally, and that's the best way to communicate with me. But other people are visual or hands-on type people and need to be communicated in a completely different way. And I've totally worked with people before, I'm not sure if you guys have, where they just go, can you just draw this? I just need a mind map. And that's how they like to be communicated. Yeah. So there will be people, even though you might have project team meetings or you send an email out, who it's just not resonating with them because it's just not their learning style. So it's not just the nonverbals, which I think is a really good tip as well, Purnima, but it's be cognizant of how do you say the same thing in almost 3 different styles if you need to, if it's that important.
100%. Yes.
All right, Magic, your next tip on your list.
Okay. My second tip for today's podcast will be about feedback. So something that I'm really passionate about when I'm working with other people. And of course, we can discuss types of feedback and everything for hours. But for me personally, the most important thing about giving a good feedback is to be sure that everyone in your team, that everyone is aware that feedback is given to your task, to your assignment, to something that you made, and not to you as a person. And if, as you said, sometimes you have to give this bad information or this constructive feedback, and we have to be sure that someone will treat it as a good thing, as a comment to your job, and not a comment to you as a person.
Perfect. Yes, feedback is a gift. And it's really hard. I find it's really hard. I wouldn't say I'm a non-confrontational person, but it's never like fun to give like critical, even if it's constructive criticism, but give that sort of critical feedback to people. It's never fun, but you do the other person and your project and your team no favors if you keep it to yourself. So I think that's really important to know as well. But the delivery is where is the key to that one. How do you deliver that sort of feedback as well? But yeah, definitely have a culture of feedback loop. Quite like that. Purnima.
Excellent. If you're the speaker and you have a listener, and if you don't want to just hear a yes or no, ask an open-ended question. Like, it has to be a sentence where the speaker, the person who's listening, should be able to give you an answer in a sentence rather than just yes or no. And if you're the listener who's going to speak, who's going to answer the question, make sure you don't stop with just yes or no. Make sure you give a proper explanation so that you don't get a follow-up question thereafter. Just assume that the person who's opposite to you don't know anything about that particular situation, who doesn't know the background about it. So just give an explanation so that there's no follow-up question.
Absolutely. I really like that. And if you are the person receiving the information, how do you get more out of that person if they give you a yes or no answer, or they're not very forthcoming? Help me understand, those sorts of things. How might we do this differently? Those sorts of leading questions to help you have that open-ended answer is sometimes helpful when you get to the real answer somewhere in there as well. Awesome. Maciek, do you have more on your list? You always have a big list.
As always, there's 700 points more on my list, but something that I want to talk about is we are not only communicating with words, with gestures and things like that, but also when we are working in a team and we're working on a project, there's a way of communication based on the project documentation. I know it's boring, okay, sorry for that, but we have to talk about it. So as a project manager, you have to be sure that all project documentation is up to date, is easily accessible for every team member, because if we miss something during our conversation, we miss something with nonverbal communication and everything, we have to be sure that everyone can easily access good project documentation and get all of the knowledge that someone needs to do his job.
Awesome. Thank you. And Purnima, did you have any others?
Absolutely, I do have a couple of them.
They keep
But I'll
rolling
just
on.
share one for now.
Okay.
Just to make sure that we avoid interruption. Like, allow the speaker to finish their thought before you actually respond. Listen to them very carefully, because sometimes interrupting them could disrupt the flow of the conversation, and it might lead you to various other conversation rather than just one single conversation. So make sure you avoid interruption. Listen to the person who's talking, and I guess that is very important for an effective communication as well.
And that's very human, to treat people with the respect that you would want. No one likes to be interrupted. I know I'm absolutely guilty of it. Sometimes I get super excited and want to, interject with an idea, but, scale it back. You'll always see me with a notebook. I write my things I'd like to talk about after, write them down. But yeah, I think that's a really good tip for anyone, not just project teams. All right, surely you two don't have any more. Are you
Just
done?
one more. I promise it's going to be the last one. 3 words: adapt communication styles. So I think we already mentioned some like points of this important tip, we have to be sure that we know what is the way that every team member wants to communicate. There are people who prefer the face-to-face meetings. There are people who wants to like have this like warm up before the conversation, writing communication. So we have to be flexible, and I think flexible is quite important word in terms of like communication.
Exactly. Just to add to that, Jess, and I promise this is the last point from me as well. We just have to make sure we adapt to the context as well. Apart from the individuals, you have to make sure we take into consideration the situation as well. Sometimes you can't communicate, like some people wouldn't have access to Teams. So sometimes you have to manage your communication styles in such a way it adapts to their situation as well, just to, nurture and support to be supportive of that particular approach. So that would be a very effective communication as well. So you don't miss out on timings, any meetings, or anything as such.
Beautiful. You two, you could talk about communication all day. I know you're both very passionate about it. It is one of the things we talk about quite a lot here at Level Up. And I'll leave you with two final thoughts. Hopefully you've made it this far in the video and you're here for my final thoughts. But my first one, and I see a lot of people not doing this, but I absolutely recommend that you plan your communications. So it doesn't matter whether you are sending an email or a Teams message or you're delivering a big presentation. Even if you spend just 5 minutes planning for that communications, you are going to be head and shoulders above where you were if you didn't plan. How many times have you been particularly on a meeting and it feels very random and scattergun and it's all over the shop and you're going, what is the message that you're trying to say here? Plan it, write down some dot points, the who, what, where, when, and why. And two things that I was taught when I'm doing what I call a 5-minute plan is understand with your audience, what are their fears? They may not always be fears. And what are their motivators? And make sure that they come to life in your communications and you just face into them. So you might have a project sponsor and you might say something like, I know you're worried about the budget, but don't worry about it. We're on track, or something like that. So think about those two considerations. And then the other thing, my team have heard me say this to death. And if you are lucky enough to have watched my videos, you would have heard me say this as well. But I love that communications are structured in a what, so what, now what structure. And if you can say things in 3 sentences, say it in 3 sentences for many reasons, but mainly we're all time poor, and let's just get to the point so that we're on the same page as quickly as possible. It's not always possible. That what, so what, now what structure could take an hour to do in a presentation, but follow that approach and that methodology and you can't go wrong. There's no gray area. People know what you're saying. And of course you've planned it as well. So they are my 2 final thoughts. I am absolutely certain that Machik and Purnima could talk about this all day. If you would like to talk to us about this topic, you're more than welcome. But for the sake of this podcast, we will close it here and we will join you next week for another episode where we'll all hopefully be together. Otherwise, we shall communicate virtually like we are today. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.